Welcome to Nature's Newsroom, coming to you live from the heart of the COP26 Climate Change Summit in Glasgow in Scotland. I'm Nick Gowing. We're bringing you a daily hour of latest information and reflections from top voices, and we'll have quite a lot of those in the next hour. Nature's Newsroom is right here at the heart of the COP26 Blue Zone, the intimate security zone, I should say. There are workshops and briefings going on here beyond that glass, including Mark Carney, who's sitting there at the moment. Hence the voices and the clapping at some point. But let me tell you that a few moments ago, Greta Thunberg was sitting there for about half an hour, and we saw her sitting first of all there at the back on a mobile phone, and we knew she was going to leave, but then she stormed out saying stop greenwashing. And as you can see, she walked past me. She wasn't in a mood to stop and explain everything as she walked into our green room. Greenwashing, greenwashing. Well, it has been another big day here in Glasgow, Finance Day, day 4. We'll also have more views on the Deforestation agreement from yesterday, plus the new urgency of dealing with the appalling state of the oceans and the acute dangers for all of us in the coming years. But first on finance. The British Finance Minister, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, set the tone. He said the international finance system is being rewired for net zero. He told everyone of the 20,000 people gathered here in this enormous exhibition site. There must be swift new money for the developing world. The International Monetary Fund has committed $650 billion. The long-promised $100 billion a year will be met, but he recognised it's not soon enough. Well, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, who is now coordinator for all financial initiatives on behalf of the United Nations and the UK hosts, said, quote, "The money is there. Now we need the plumbing." So we have plumbing, we have rewiring for electricity as well. But Mr. Carney said there is a new confidence of finance to create a smooth path to net zero. And one leading figure in creating huge financial progress, Steve Waygood, who's the Chief Responsible Investment Officer for Aviva, said, and I quote here, "I've seen more change in 12 months than in the 22 years I've been in finance." Well, let's pick up first of all on the deforestation agreement of yesterday. Here's Nikki Cardas. Nikki Cardas, Executive Director of Global Canopy, your reaction to the deal announced yesterday on deforestation?
Well, first of all, thank God it was there. I mean, these are big announcements.
Did you have doubts?
I didn't expect it to be as big as it was, if I'm honest. And I can tell you why. We had Brazil at the table, we had Congo DRC, who've made commitments before, Indonesia, but also Russia, so boreal forests. So we're now covering 85% of the world's forests, and that's really big. Brazil and Russia haven't turned up before in these kind of commitments. And even more critical, in my opinion, and what I didn't expect, if I'm honest, is that China has come to the table. Now, why is that important? China imports 1/4 of the world's forest risk commodities, as they are called, soy, palm oil, beef, which are driving 2/3 of deforestation worldwide. So getting a commitment from China alongside the EU on these matters is really, really important. So I was pleased and a little bit surprised to see that.
And what about the fact that 100 countries signed up and offered significant amounts of money?
Yeah, so that's really important, that this comes with money.
Were you surprised by that as well?
No, I wasn't surprised so much by that, I've got to say. I mean, it was more the composition, the depth, rather than the breadth. It's a great achievement. It's great that we've got 100 countries at the table. It's critical, and let's not underestimate how important this is. We've got 20 billion now on the table, 12 billion committed from governments, another 7 billion, I think, so we're up about 19 by the private sector. That's really, really important. Let me also say that 1.6 billion of that is going to indigenous peoples to help secure land tenure, a critical part of the puzzle that has been ignored before. So we're seeing money flowing to indigenous peoples, not just statements, but money, which is incredibly important. And there is a problem here, which is, we've got the 20 billion, it's a really, really significant sum, but fighting in the other direction, we've got almost $1 trillion of finance which is going into the supply chains, the commodities that are driving deforestation. So it's still a bit of an unfair fight. We've got to do more, but this is a fantastic start.
Finally, Nikki, what about the ability to police this? What does money do? And what about the fact, as we've heard from several contributors to the Nature Newsroom, that really there are people out there who are very good at avoiding these kind of stipulations and this kind of rule making for them because they essentially think they've got impunity?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And there will be some of that. We know there will be some of that. But look, it matters that this was at the top of the COP. It matters that this was first. It matters that the world was watching. We've got better data. So not only is the world watching, but the world can see better. We can see forests from the sky. We can map supply chains. And let me just talk about one commitment in among those commitments by the finance sector. 30 plus financial institutions with 9 trillion almost in assets under management committing to get deforestation out of their supply chains, halting the bad finance by 2025. And today we're launching a roadmap that shows them, helps them, enables them, says this is what you need to do to get there, and we'll be tracking against that. So we and other independent groups will be looking at those commitments and tracking them year on year. So hopefully there's no place to hide. Will everyone deliver on their commitments? No, but it's a step in the right direction.
Nikki Martins, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's pick up on reflections about finance particularly and the impact on every nation. And I'm joined by Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who is Chief Executive of Global Environment Facility. Carlos, you've been in that job now for just over a year, former Environment and Energy Minister for Costa Rica. Mark Carney is sitting there and he talked about there being now the need for plumbing. There's plenty of cash, but we need now the plumbing.
That is correct. That is correct. And
can that be achieved?
Yes, totally. It can be achieved, and that plumbing needs to go quickly and in the right direction.
Is there a design for it?
Well, there is plenty of design. Many funds, multilateral funds and bilateral cooperation has been supporting climate action and biodiversity action. It's a matter of amplifying upscaling. For that, we need to understand that on the recipient side, we need countries with stronger institutions, more transparency and accountability, and be able to deal with the issue of lack of policy coherence. Because still, many recipient countries are investing in economic activities that contribute to climate change, that what they are actually investing in mitigating and adapting to climate change.
What about the trust level? Do you feel in the first 3 days of this summit that there really is a sense that actually stuff is happening in a way that you could not have imagined even a year ago?
Well, definitely yes. Definitely yes. And trust and building trust is probably the most important outcome of this COP. Because
are you feeling it at the moment?
Yes, I do. I do. Because allocating and committing to $100 billion is great. But $100 billion is just 7.1% of what we should be mobilizing today to be on track of the 1.5 degrees.
Well, Mark Carney said a few hours ago in the plenary, he said the money is there. Is that the way it seems to you?
Well, the money is there at this point to commit to the 2009 commitment to mobilize $100 billion for developing countries, but that is not enough to fully be on track with the climate, with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement can be achieved if all nations mobilize more efficiently and address the issue of negative investment, perverse incentives, and wrong policies and incentives.
But is it just about money? What about the political commitments to back the money?
You're sure. For sure, at the end of the day, it's not a matter of money, because in terms of global GDP, there is enough money. Unfortunately, that money is being invested in activities that are contributing to climate change. So policy coherence is a key element. The technology is there. Also, the technology is there. Money is there. The technology is not there. We need a strong political commitment to make it possible, and that requires trust. This is what we expect out of this COP.
You and I last spoke when you were Energy and Environment Minister, and obviously you were looking at things from a slightly different point of view. But would you say there's now an irreversible momentum for not just forward movement, but also rapid forward movement, which can meet the kind of challenges that have to be met in order to meet net zero, not by 2070, but by the end of this decade?
Well, yes, definitely yes. I feel that this is my 20th COP. Definitely, this is very different to everything I've seen before, and I see a groundswell movement, particularly by the fact.
A groundswell movement.
Yes, particularly by the private sector. Private sector has understood that there is no good business in a sick planet, and we're heading toward that scenario. So private sector will be moving the political forces for the right policies and the right political decisions.
Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, thank you very much indeed for joining us here at Nature's Newsroom at the COP26 summit. Well, it's not just about money, it's not just about deforestation, there are issues of the ocean, there's plenty still on the agenda for the next 10 days. The disparity between the value of the ocean and investment in its protection as part of addressing the climate crisis, that's the core of a new report, a worrying new report. Natural climate solutions receive less than 3% of all climate finance, with the ocean receiving less than 1%. Well, let's pick up the issues on oceans and the impact on them at the moment and the lack of finance, particularly what is really needed at the moment. I'll introduce each of our guests as I ask them a question. But first, Ed Fox, whale and dolphin conservation. What is the ocean worth? What is the value of the ocean?
Well, it's a great question. The short answer is no one knows. In one sense, it's incalculable. It's like saying, what is life worth? But also because we've always valued it for the wrong reasons. We've valued it for the lives that we take out of it, that we extract from it, not for the life that it gives us. So take whales, for example. I can tell you what the value of a whale steak is in Japan, or how much they sell whales for dog meat in Norway. But no one has worked out really what the value is of the life of a whale over 200 years in some cases, in terms of the benefits that they bring back to the environment, soaking up carbon, moving nutrients around, and even when they die, they help to help the ocean flourish in terms as their bodies sink to the ocean floor. So what we're trying to do is actually to answer that question: what is the ocean worth to us if we actually valued the nature-based, the natural services that it provides us?
But does value actually have to be in dollars or euros or pounds?
Yes, in short answer, you can value it for all the intrinsic, the kind of the well-being that we get from it. But actually, as this report, A Drop in the Ocean, shows, very aptly named A Drop in the Ocean, shows, only 1% of climate finance is being spent on the ocean, even though the ocean is 70% of the surface of the planet. It's our largest carbon sink and our greatest natural asset. So the importance of this report is actually we are looking at new finance mechanisms that allow people to invest in the ocean and in whales.
All right, A Drop in the Ocean. Michael Barber, partner in ESG advice from Deloitte. What are the report's findings on the current state of investment, picking up on what Ed has just said?
Well, what the report finds is, just as we thought, the oceans have been hiding in plain sight. There's been a collective failure of vision and imagination, because we are getting services from the ocean valued at anywhere north of $2.25 trillion a year. Yet that's an asset that we are denuding. We're not investing in it. As Ed said, maybe investments are approaching sort of 1% of total nature-based services. And it's crazy, because this is an asset that protects our ecosystems, protects our world, enables our economy. And there's just a fabulous opportunity to invest here and get both a financial return, to your earlier question, but also a qualitative return and a socially just return.
So just to converge nature and oceans, the externality of the ocean is simply not costed at the moment.
It's not costed. It's an asset that is being used for free, and consequently it is being abused.
Sandy Luke, Chief Executive of the Marine Conservation Society. What do we need for financing and funding now then?
What we need is to finance to recover our ocean to good health. And there's a study
That's an enormous task.
It's an enormous task. And there is a study, though, that says that by 2050 we could achieve that. But obviously, at the moment, it's in bad health. And at the moment, as we've already heard, the financing is minimal. The finance and the investment in the ocean to try and help it recover is minimal. So that's what we really need to change. So, if you think that the ocean covers, as you've already said, 70% of the globe, 80% of the biodiversity that is on Earth is in the ocean. It provides climate and weather services. It makes us feel better. It provides us with food and medicine, all these things, and all of that is basically the value of life. So what we want is for investors and for countries and governments as well to really recognize the life-giving value of the ocean, so that what we recognize isn't the cost of protecting it to business or the cost of extraction or the value of extraction. It's the value of life that we must build our economy on.
Let me ask all of you, about mobilizing not just public opinion but governments and those with responsibility. Does anyone believe they've got responsibility for the ocean, Ed?
No, I don't think they do at the moment, but I think what's interesting actually is it might not be governments that lead the way on this, that actually lots of businesses want to get involved, and I think they recognise that actually there can be no solution to climate breakdown without the ocean. We have to protect it as if our lives depend on it, because frankly they do.
So who do you think is responsible for it, Michael? Who's going to pick up the yoke and also run with the cost?
So I think governments and civil society are responsible for the policy framework and the legal basis that we need to make sure that we value the asset properly and can then invest in it.
But up to the 12-mile limit, the 20-mile limit, or deep into the Pacific Ocean?
We need to go deep. We need to go deep into the ocean. And if we can get there, and I believe we can, there's just a fabulous return on investment available. And at the moment, as the Dasgupta review turned out, we are engaged in biodiversity destruction in pursuit of financial returns of 5 to 10% a year. What the report shows is the right investment can achieve returns of 500% a year. Put simply, oceans are something we should be investing in.
Sandy, from your position at the Marine Conservation Society, who do you believe is responsible? Who's going to pick up this enormous baton of responsibility to achieve what you say is needed?
I think it's completely shared responsibility. It's international, it's national, it's local, it's governments, it's us. All of us together have to work together to do this.
But is that achievable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things when you're asking a question about the costs, we need to think of it as the value and the investment in nature, which will give us returns, as Mike already said, which will give us returns in well-being and economically. And I think if business and civil society and governments work together, which they will and they must, I think that is absolutely achievable.
So are you taking heart, all three of you, from what we've seen here in the last 24 hours in Glasgow on methane and particularly deforestation? Extraordinary achievements, even if there are wrinkles and bumps along the way, that actually it's proved that you can get large numbers of countries to act and give money.
Yes, no, absolutely, and there's a precedent for this. So the moratorium on whaling was the world coming together to act for the global commons. Now, absolutely, we can do it again. But we hear a lot about trees, and I love trees, but there's not enough land to plant enough trees to solve this crisis. We have to look at the ocean.
Michael, what do your clients say? What are you trying to do to persuade your clients on this?
So our clients are recognising that nature is part of the solution to the climate crisis.
Are they doing it voluntarily, or are you having to press them?
They're looking at this voluntarily, Nick. Even businesses that are sophisticated in their decarbonisation journey know they're not going to get to zero without carbon credits. So carbon credits are a part of our future. They need to be high quality carbon credits. They need to come after businesses have done the responsible thing and decarbonised everywhere where they can. But we need a way of generating that positive carbon sink, and the oceans is a fantastic place to do it, and it resonates with clients.
Sandy, what is your prognosis then? What happens if we don't manage to manage the ocean and we continue to use it or assume it's there as something which can be extracted indefinitely?
Yeah, the ocean, like nature, like climate, is in crisis. It is an emergency. We can't carry on abusing it like we are. So if the oceans can't carry on, and if they die, basically, and they're on the way, then that's the end of us as well.
Well, all of you, what is the cost of not looking after the ocean with the kind of statistics you all know so well? What is going to be the deficit if we're not careful?
It sounds it sounds big, but it's life on Earth. It is our life support system, and if we continue to treat it as a resource that is a blank check, and a bin, which is effectively how we treat it, then we don't have any chance of averting.
But you're able to
breakdown.
say that here because the underpinning of this summit is about the existential threat to the planet.
Yes.
So it's in tune with what we're talking about here.
And if there are whales here, and anyone who's also got skin in the game, and we're not the only species, they would speak up to the ocean, and that's what we're doing here.
At least there are dolphins in the Clyde at the moment. Michael.
Well, the WWF have valued the services of the oceans at $2.5 trillion. That's not far short of the economy of the UK. So if we lose the oceans, that's what we lose in terms of financials.
Sandy.
I think the ocean is the unsung hero in the fight against climate change and the nature crisis.
Unsung hero.
Yeah.
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
Because we've already said it, the ocean is often an afterthought when it comes to looking at the value of life in it, at investing in it, at protecting it, at managing it. It's often an afterthought.
To give you a stat, Nick, everyone loves the Amazon as the lungs of the world. Just the phytoplankton in the ocean, 4 Amazons. That's just the phytoplankton. So Sandy's point, unsung hero.
Michael, Sandy, Ed, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
You're with Nature's Newsroom with me, Nick Gowing. So we've had oceans, we've had finance. Let's look again at deforestation, and particularly the impact on indigenous people. I'm joined by 3 guests here who can talk about whether the deforestation agreement of Monday is really strong enough. First of all, let me go to Kristen Walker, who's Managing Director for the Centre of Communities and Conservation at Conservation International. Briefly, Kristen, is it enough?
It's almost enough. It's almost enough when there is proper recognition for the rights of indigenous people in those countries that have acknowledged that.
What's missing?
Legislation that recognizes the rights of indigenous people at the national level.
What about our guest from Nepal, Tunga Rai, who's National Coordinator for the Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities? Are you heartened by the deal?
It's a good sign, given that this is undertaken in a proper way, meaning that the land tenure and the tenure rights, land rights of indigenous peoples are secured while addressing deforestation and forest degradation.
Peter Seligman is CEO of Near Terra. Welcome, Peter, which advocates for indigenous people across the world. Are you pretty buoyant after the deal?
I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged that leaders, governments, philanthropists are all focusing on the issue of reducing deforestation. And I think that the acknowledgement that the protection of indigenous peoples is an essential part of any strategy for addressing climate, biodiversity is right on. And I think it's important that we need to recognize that the details of delivery and accountability have got to be addressed very carefully.
All right, so what's missing, Kristen?
I think what we really need to have to focus on is how we actually get resources to the ground to help communities.
What kind of resources?
There was an announcement yesterday, $1.7 billion for indigenous peoples and local communities.
Do you think that's enough?
No, it's not enough at all. But I think the challenges we have is that how is that money getting delivered to the ground? How are people like Tunga and their communities helping to design mechanisms where they can receive the funds, but also show they're accountable to them without the bureaucracy that some of the overseas development aid comes with?
What would that money buy?
What would that money buy? I mean, Tunga's the best one to talk about
I'll ask him in a moment.
But I think it's really supporting that indigenous leadership on the ground to protect the planet and help fight against deforestation.
Tunga, your view from Nepal, is it the money is there but not enough?
Yes, if we see the data, 80% of the world biodiversity exists in the territories of indigenous peoples. Then if you look at proportionate of the amount allocated or placed 1.7 billion for indigenous peoples and local communities, then this is the question: is it really the proportionate of the contribution indigenous peoples and local communities are doing to conservation of biodiversity and the environment? And second most important question is what we do and how we do it.
Peter, Neotero means one earth in Esperanto.
Our Earth.
Our Earth. I can't read my writing here. Our Earth,
Oh, yes.
rather than one Earth. But what about your view of what needs to be added to a deal? Okay, it's quite a significant deal that was achieved, but it's still not, according to Kristen and Tunga, enough.
They're both absolutely right. I mean, it's a big step in the right direction. It's an indicator that there's a growing understanding that indigenous peoples who control a third of the earth and 80% of the biodiversity and much of the above ground carbon have to be acknowledged as the people that understand this place.
Were you surprised by that?
Not really. Not really. I wasn't surprised because there has been this growing emergence of intense movement and communication amongst indigenous peoples. A lot of effort to reach governmental leaders, a lot of effort to reach the philanthropic leaders. Neotero was involved in a recent commitment of $5 billion by 9 major philanthropies to support 30 by 30, the idea of protecting 30% of the earth by 2030. And what was essential was that every one of those funders, for the first time, acknowledged a set of agreed upon principles that said the rights of indigenous peoples cannot be impaired. There has to be free, prior, informed consent of anything that takes place on indigenous territories. And the security of the earth is not just through protected areas. It must be acknowledged that a separate pathway is indigenous guardianship. So this conversation has been going on for some time, and luckily we had a deadline of this week so that those announcements could be heard. And then the bilaterals and the multilaterals stepped up and said, well, we can do this too. And so they came up with $1.7 billion. We just finished. The one issue that they have not addressed is how do we ensure that indigenous peoples have direct access to those resources, because getting money out of bilaterals is really tough.
Indeed. Well, let's find out what you've heard from Nepal overnight. Is there a feeling that money will be accessible, Tunga?
Yes, this is a very big question.
Cautious.
This is another big question. That's why I see how we do and what we do. Climate finance actually means to be accessible, paradigm shifting, and also the efficient. So the big question is how it is accessible to indigenous peoples and local communities in order to make the best use of the available finance. So we're a little bit hopeful of making best use of it, but I think there is a long way to go.
But has there been a positive response overnight in Nepal to this?
This is another very difficult question.
Well, it's either yes or no. Good or bad, or it could have been more.
It's good, yeah. I said at least it's a start.
All right, Kristen, what's your view of how this is going to develop? You know, the existential crisis from the climate emergency is getting faster, and it's getting bigger, and it's getting more urgent, and we're seeing foot dragging. What's your view of where this now needs to go?
Look, indigenous peoples and local communities are at the front lines, right? The political will is there. We are encouraged. We have to move to action. We can't spend 3, 4, 5 years trying to get resources to the ground in communities, so it needs to be agile. The philanthropy community needs to come out together with governments to be able to create, in conjunction with indigenous people, creative mechanisms to get these resources to the ground so that communities can react, adapt, and solve for these problems that they're already fighting against.
But is it in your view what we saw with this new deal on deforestation a real mobilizer, an accelerator, a multiplier?
I think if all the parties move, it will be. If we get caught on political debates and how to do that on the ground, then we're going to get stuck again.
Do you think there's a mood here for getting stuck?
I think there's a lot of hope. But I think once you get back to countries in certain parts of the world, it will be a larger challenge.
Peter, do you think there is a mood for acceleration here, which you're detecting, not just on this issue, but many issues?
There is an extraordinary intensity of going forward fast. I'm very, very impressed with the business sector coming in, making multi-trillion-dollar commitments against deforestation. with the philanthropists stepping up. It's with the civil society. I'm thrilled with the protests as well, because we need to hold everybody's feet to the ground, because it's so easy to have a conversation that goes nowhere. And as an elder, I've seen many cops that have had great good signs and they have not delivered on promises. So right now, there's big promises. Let's see what happens in the next week and the next month to see whether those promises are fulfilled, the resources getting to the right people having the access and the political space to be able to act. If indigenous peoples have the opportunity, this place, this earth, can be secured. And if we, as non-indigenous, can learn to listen to the special understanding that indigenous peoples have with their places, that reciprocal relationship between all beings, we actually have a chance to get out of the hole that we put ourselves in.
All right, well, I hope you'll be a satisfied elder.
I hope so, too.
As the COPs develop. So thank you very much. You're all smiling. I'm smiling too. Thank you all very much indeed to Peter de Kirsten and Tunga. Thank you very much indeed. But we'll stay on Indigenous, because let's reflect on the experiences of one Indigenous sector. Let's go to Australia.
Hello. My name is Jayala Dulamunmun. I'm a traditional elder from this country that they call Australia. For hundreds of thousands of years, we've looked after this country. We've looked after the environment. And it's so important. If we have the chance again to be able to look after the environment, we'd have a better atmosphere. Instead of all other things that is happening here on our sacred and significant land. We're not consulted. Other people think they know this land more than what we do. But we are the keepers of this land. We don't own it. We live with it and on it. And we don't take that possession of being ownership. Because ownership can destroy the land and the environment. And we need to be able to come back to that. So thank you, Glasgow, for allowing me to speak the part that I need to talk about environment. Thank you.
Well, how are cities coping with this enormous challenge of sustainability? I'm joined by Marvin Rees, who's mayor of the wonderful city of Bristol. I was at university there, Marvin.
Yeah.
But you're a city of almost 500,000 people. What are the challenges that you're facing?
Well, it's paying for it, to be perfectly frank. 42 square miles, 465,000 people today, growing to 550,000. We have a housing crisis, 1 in 4 children living in poverty. So we have to meet those challenges in the context of both the climate and an ecological emergency. And holding all those things together is the biggest challenge at the local level.
I should say that your own background, you understand poverty, you understand the areas which are really badly affected by all of this.
Yeah, which is why we've placed such an emphasis on a just transition. It's been one of my concerns that the environmental movement historically has not really understood poverty, not really understood race and class. Started to talk a lot about it more recently, but that's not always done in a way in which I've found to be authentic. But we have to be careful that we don't further disadvantage already disadvantaged people as we go through the economic restructuring we have to go through.
But one of the great challenges for politicians like yourself at the local level and also at the national level is convincing people who are struggling, including including in the middle and upper classes at times, people who are struggling, that they've got to change the way they live. They've got to completely reconfigure the way they assume that life will have to, they can run their lives. How do you do that?
Well, there's a couple of ways, and that's been a challenge I've brought to the environmental movement and some of the campaign groups, the well-known ones that we meet. It's very difficult to say to someone, listen, I need you to take seriously the existential threat that will be on us in 15 years, when their biggest existential threat is whether their child is going to come home alive because they've been stabbed, or whether they're going to feed their children tonight. So you have to respect where people are and deal with the challenges they face, and that is the poverty, the inequality, the mental health, the everyday challenges, which makes social conditions it's critical to delivering on decarbonisation. I'd say is one of the biggest challenges we face. But alongside that, part of the challenge is actually not tied up in convincing people. It's redesigning our cities so that the very systems that underpin our city life, energy, transport, housing, are decarbonised and pro-nature, so that people don't even have to think about whether they are living a low-impact life. It's just the way the city works.
What kind of calculation do you, as a politician running a big city of 500,000, what kind of calculation do you need to make now about how you say there is an existential threat to our planet and our very survival on the planet, even if you're facing an existential threat putting food on the table? How do you get over that, given the emergency and the pressure and the time pressure here we're hearing at Glasgow, the imminent international catastrophe?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to get over it because the crisis we face today in areas like adult social care, special educational needs, children's mental health are right here, right now, and an area we have to deal in. But we do try and, so as a local government level, what we find is we are trading with the funding crisis, trading off crises against crises, but also immediate crises against long-term crises. And that takes the wisdom of Solomon that I don't have and very few of us do. But what we are doing is working much more collaboratively. So at the city level, life in Bristol is not shaped only by Bristol City Council, it's universities, it's business, it's voluntary sector. So we've worked together to write our climate strategy on our ecological strategy. And what we're also doing is working at the national and international level to try and identify new sources of finance that we can use to invest in the decarbonisation and pro-nature development opportunities that are out there.
Overall, Marvin, and this is not meant to be a simplistic question, do you think everyone gets it yet, particularly business, which can lead so much, just having in HR and the kind of relationship between workers and their bosses, they can come up with ideas, they can realise that there are different ways of running a business?
I think people can get it. I would say most people would get it, but most people get that racism is wrong, that child hunger is wrong, that sexism is wrong.
But what about
that
the
doesn't
climate
mean
emergency?
that's what I'm saying. It's in that category. We can get it and not solve it, and that's the danger. I think one of the biggest threats to COP at the moment is that what will happen is we'll have a whole series of big financial announcements that are not actually attached to how we're going to get it done. So $1.4 trillion that is not attached to real places, measurable outcomes and specific dates is just $1.4 trillion that's not accessible to the people that are actually going to deliver. So it's very important that COP talks about how as well as how much.
And are you being listened to?
We're getting traction here, and I think there's a growing conversation about the importance of mayors. And on that front, I'd say you cannot have a conversation about decarbonisation without talking to city leaders. We know that the challenge on climate change will be won or lost in cities. Bad urbanisation will cost the planet disproportionately. Good urbanisation offers more efficient living and could actually be the solution to a growing world population. But it means that we've got to attach the announcements made here about finance to the actual places people are going to be living.
Marvin Rees, Mayor of Bristol, the Western English city, welcome. Thank you very much indeed for that. I should say the applause probably should be for you, but actually was from a workshop outside.
Well
so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So if you come with the applause, you got it. Thank you very much, Marvin.
Thanks.
You're with Nature's Newsroom, applause and all, nothing guaranteed though. I'm Nick Gowing. Let's move on now. What's it like negotiating? What is going on behind those closed doors, or wherever you can track what is happening? Well, I'm joined by John Verdick, who is Director of International Climate Policy at the Nature Conservancy. And John, you were a former US State Department negotiator on forests.
Correct.
For 7 years. What's it like behind the sealed doors?
I think behind sealed doors, everybody's running all over the place. And
Running,
texting furiously, and everybody is looking for different doors that are open.
Why are they texting?
texting because everybody knows different people, and part of diplomacy is making sure you're connecting different groups to other groups.
Are those texts traceable, or are they on private mobile phones? In other words, they're not retrievable as part of the record?
I think you probably have a group of both. Many of them are in emails that are on government servers. Many of them are actually just texts. Sometimes it's, where are you? We need to talk.
What is it that can seal success or achievement or progress, in your view?
I think trust is number one. You have developed and developing countries here, both looking to increase ambition across the board. For one side, ambition often means greenhouse gas emissions. For another side, ambition means finance.
Does it take a deadline to get an agreement?
It helps, and I think we see that each year with COP, that you put a date when the end of the negotiations can end, and the negotiators will go up until the very last moment, every time.
But of course, clocks often stop.
They do. We've also seen in other COPs where sometimes the COP goes a day after, and sometimes negotiators sleep for a night or two and stay in the convention center.
In your experience, does it actually produce success when that clock stops and suddenly there's a focus, an absolute imperative? It didn't happen in Copenhagen.
Yeah, it's true. In Paris, the clock actually helped push. But in Paris, it went until 3, 4 in the morning every night for the last few nights. And I think the thing that was different is the higher up political ambition, the higher up the big push from presidents and prime ministers was there, which comes down to negotiators, makes the negotiators open up a little bit their red lines, and you find out what's a pink line and what's a red line.
Did you often ask yourself, why does it need 4 o'clock in the morning and getting up at 6 o'clock, having a couple of croissants, a bit of coffee, and then going back into the room? Why can't this be done in a more measured way?
Yeah, I think that's true. I always ask myself that at about 3 in the morning. But I think part of it is also, it's a decades and probably centuries old diplomatic move. Try to tire everybody out, wear them down, get to a point where some of these things that people were saying, red lines in my country can't go here, becomes something that this can be traded for this, or this can be a little bit more flexible.
Final thought, John. I mean, when you listen to the language from Monday and Tuesday, apocryphal language, apocalyptic almost as well. We're 1 minute from disaster. We're 1 minute from catastrophe. We're facing, as Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said, we're facing catastrophe. Is that enough, do you think, to make people, even if they're under very intense political direction, come to a middle ground, or is it actually digging people into, particularly from some countries, into a position from which they don't really want to emerge to come to some kind of last minute deal?
I think we've known the science is there for a number of years. The IPCC has told us that we're going in this direction.
And it's getting worse.
It is getting worse, and the science is getting better, and so we're more certain. I think the one thing that's changing is it's not just the agreements here at the UN that are going to solve all this. It's going to be what are cities doing, what are countries doing, what are corporations doing to green their supply chains. It's going to take all of us doing everything we can, not just the negotiations.
All right, John. Well, thank you very much indeed. John Verdiek, the Director of International Climate Policy at the Nature Conservancy. Thanks for the insight into what negotiation is really all about. Well, it is now 24 hours since the deforestation deal. Svein Holstetter is President and CEO of Yara International, which specializes as a giant in agricultural products. It's one of the leading companies of the world when it comes to crop nutrition and science-based farming. What does he think the impact of the deforestation deal will be? Sven, is the deforestation deal symptomatic of something far more dramatic which farmers will take notice of?
Sure, and I'm really pleased now to see from the discussions yesterday that nature is really put on the agenda and that we're addressing deforestation. I mean, look at agriculture. 25% of greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. Half of that is change of land use, which to a great extent also is causing deforestation. So by putting that on the agenda, putting structures in place that help the farmers to get rewards for driving their farming in the right way, I think that's very positive.
Also the deal on methane, and the methane tends to come from animals.
Yeah, so we need to look at the totality here, and methane is a potent emission, so we need to deal with that. But again, it's not only about putting restrictions, but it's about putting incentives in place to drive the right behavior, and that's an important part of this.
But how do you reckon the average farmer, whether large or small, is really going to view this? Will they see this as something to be avoided, which they can through jiggery-pokery, they can somehow do it? Or will they respect it and understand the principles behind it?
Well, I speak with the farmers very often, and in Yara we reach out to 20 million farmers across the world, and I don't think any of them wake up in the morning thinking about how they can do harm to the environment. On the contrary, if there are any people that really look after land, it's the farmers. But we have put in place as a world incentives that don't reward the right behavior. So if you can create a structure that helps farmers to get paid not only for the crops, but how efficient it was produced, the water that is used, good nutrition use and nutritional content, we will create a structure that is helpful for the farmers rather than harmful.
But for many of them, for most of them, the idea of regenerative agriculture, changing the way they do their farming, doesn't come easy. In fact, some of them resent it.
Well, we have a history as well where a lot of burdens have been put on the shoulders of the farmers. And I can understand that there is some skepticism to this because of changes in regulation and changes in incentives in the past. But one important part here is to really define what is regenerative agriculture, so we have a predictability around that, and that's something that is key, and that I'm also spending a lot of time on, that we have that predictability that in turn can help the farmers to get paid for running the farms in a sustainable way, and we have to structure it in a way that creates incentives and income for the farmers as well.
Has there been a significant amount of momentum created in the last 24 hours here in Glasgow, which is irreversible now for the farming community?
I hope so.
Do you believe so?
Well, it's still, I can't conclude on a 2-week event in 24 hours, but I see a lot of positive momentum, and I see strong participation from the private sector and from the organizations as well, so I'm positive.
Sven, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So let's keep that momentum going on food, particularly in the agricultural sector. And as we heard there from Sven Holstetter from Yara, he's hopeful that there will be some kind of change. I'm joined now by Sarah Faruzesh, who is from the Just Rural Transition. And you're joining us to talk about this. Particularly, you've got 3 points you want to make, one of which is about agriculture, about food transformation. What's your point?
So we want to welcome the package of measures that were introduced yesterday, the commitments to eliminate deforestation and transform land use and food systems and agriculture. But there are 3 things that we want to remind everyone. One is that these commitments and pledges now need to turn into action. We've had pledges and commitments before. We know that's not going to get us where we need to be. The food and ag systems and agriculture currently contribute around 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and we can't really remain within the 1.5 degree if we...
Are you skeptical and suspicious then?
No, I'm hopeful, but I think this is now time to take action. We have 10 years to transform this sector, and the scale of the challenge is huge. We need to transform the sector whilst continue feeding a growing global population. So I'm hopeful, but I think we need to recognize that the scale is huge.
Well, let me just pick up a point I made to Sven there, that actually a lot of people in the farming community are still quite conservative about change, about regeneration and so on. In other words, they can't really believe that that's the way farming needs to go.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that point, but the point is, and that's what the Just Rural Transition Initiative is trying to change, is that we need to make this change with farmers at the table, and we need to make sure that we bring them with us on this journey. They're not the passive recipients of policy and investment decisions. They are the ones who are going to be at the front lines implementing these solutions. So we need to make sure that the solutions are going to work for them. And that's also very context specific, right? So we need to develop these solutions with the farmers at the table or at the kitchen, and make sure that the solutions that are going to come out of this is going to be, delivering.
Are you saying from your experience at your organization that the farmers are not included enough?
They are not included enough, absolutely. And
are they ignored?
they are not ignored. I think that's changing and for the better. But historically, in general, food and agriculture has not been high enough on the agenda. It hasn't got the recognition that it requires and it deserves. But that's changing. It's certainly, we see farmers' organizations being more involved in the discussions. They are, some of them are here. There are a lot of events, a lot of exciting momentum. But I think there needs to be more of that.
Because you also have two other points you want to make on pledges.
Yes, so the second thing is we need finance and we need more finance, and that needs to come from both the private sector and public sector.
Finance for what?
For transforming food and agricultural systems. At the moment, 2/3 of farmers and their communities make up 2/3 of people living in extreme poverty are from farming communities, and that's absolutely unacceptable. On the flip side, if we invest in this sector, we are 2 to 4 times more effective at reducing poverty and growing the economy. So the business case is very clear, and there is finance out there that could be repurposed to transform the sector. For example, globally, governments spend more than $720 billion in support to the food and agriculture sector. Sometimes those investments undermine our environmental and sustainable development goals, but if they're repurposed, they could go a long way in transforming the sector for the better.
And quickly, your last point.
The last point is really, again, just re-emphasizing that this change needs to happen with the farmers and for the farmers.
All right. Well, Sarah Ferozesh, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the Just Rural Transition with those reflections on how things are moving forward. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, let's move. There are so many issues to be covered. Let me tell you, there are enormous numbers of exhibition rooms and pavilions and so on around here. Trying to cherry pick the kind of things which are being said, it's impossible to know everything that's going on. And those of you who are either here or know what it's like at these kind of COPs, you can be completely overwhelmed. But let's get other views as well on other issues. About nature. Nature is now becoming so central to everything that has to be considered in climate change, and it's really being catalyzed by the findings of the report by Professor Dasgupta, the Emeritus Professor of Economics at Cambridge University, who said that nature is not factored in as an externality for everyone to be considering, whether private individuals or certainly the corporate sector. They just believe they can exploit the land and there's no cost. That has to change, and it's become a very significant factor in everything that is being discussed here. So let's listen to Natalie Seddon, who's the founding director of the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at Oxford University and is also an official friend of COP26, one of 30 global experts currently advising the UK government at the conference. You've been focusing, Natalie Seddon, on nature-based solutions. What's your assessment of how this has now become so central to the way business and governments are thinking about the way to take forward climate solutions?
It's absolutely essential. Our failure to address climate change and our failure to address biodiversity loss means that we need to find much more ambitious, much more joined-up solutions. It's against that backdrop, backed up by the science, that we know that we need to scale up the protection, the restoration, just general investments in nature.
But are you heartened by the speed at which this has been embraced, particularly since the Dasgupta report of last February?
Well, I think the momentum has been building gradually. I mean, we knew that we needed to do this in 1992. There's been a huge effort across. It's a long time ago. A huge effort across civil society, across the science community, and then suddenly, as you say, a recent acceleration, which is absolutely essential.
Essential, but is it not just essential, but welcome? In other words, are you almost astonished at the way business and governments have gripped the importance of nature, which you've been working on for so long?
We are relieved, but we need to make sure that the integrity question is really well addressed.
What do you mean by that?
We need to make sure that all this investment, some of it from the private sector, some of it from the public sector, is channeled towards projects that can genuinely deliver for biodiversity, for carbon, and for local people. And there are concerns that at the moment, some of that money is going towards projects that don't have that high integrity, that won't necessarily deliver on one or even any of those goals over the long term.
But central to all of this has really been an essential abuse of nature. taken for granted. It comes free, instead of which it being a cost and an externality to be put into calculations. Is that a major change for you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have to repay our debt to nature. All the incredible development gains of the last 2 centuries in health and education and technology has been achieved without paying our debt to nature. It has been assumed that, you know, the services that biodiversity supports comes for free, and it's now payback time. We now realise that we can no longer not, take the value, incredible value of nature into account when making decisions.
Well, you say it's understood, and you're a professor of nature-based solutions at Oxford University, but vast numbers of people out there have no clue about the work you've been doing and the importance of the work that you've been doing, and therefore the way they are abusing nature in virtually everything they do, day in, day out.
Communities across the world are realizing that we need to invest in nature to be protected from the growing impacts of climate change, as well as to help us slow the warming. So there's already an enormous amount of warming locked into the system. We're already seeing increased fires and floods and droughts across the world. That's not just in the global south. We're now, it's basically on the doorstep of the really, really wealthy nations, right? And so we can no longer ignore that. And during this period of time where those impacts on climate change on people are increasing, so we're seeing that nature is playing an incredibly important role. For example, the Sundarbans mangrove forest in the Bay of Bengal, protecting enormous numbers of people and property and agriculture during massive cyclones.
But final quick question. Do you think the public realizes the enormity of the changes they're going to have to make to their way of life?
There's a lot more awareness and growing awareness. There's a lot more that needs to be done in informing the public. Absolutely.
Natalie Seddon, thank you.
Thank you.
Underscoring there our focus on nature. Let's return now to the issue of oceans, and really something where there has to be urgent action as well. We reflected that with 3 guests earlier. Let's go to Ralph Chammy, who's Assistant Director in the International Monetary Fund. Ralph Chammy, you're an Assistant Director at the International Monetary Fund. You're running the Institute for Capacity Development. First of all, let me understand why that's relevant to what we're talking about on oceans.
Oh, definitely, because what is capacity development is helping countries understand and manage better their natural resources, not only their financial resources.
So how do we ensure that money is going to go to the right places, particularly the talk here and the mention here of under the Glasgow Financial Initiative, known as GFANZ, that there's $130 trillion of investment needed?
Indeed. So it's not only that the money is there, the question is how do you bring the money to do the right thing, because money can come in and not necessarily do the right thing. So if you want the money to come in to help, help protect nature, help make nature more regenerative, and help nature help us in the fight against climate change, we have to do certain things on our part.
But how do you access the money for ocean solutions related to the climate crisis emergency?
Absolutely. So money comes in, I call it the supply side, but the demand side is coming from the need to go carbon zero. So the climate accord, the Paris Accord, if you like, is created an insatiable demand for carbon sequestration, carbon reduction. That's called demand. Now we need the supply. Where would the supply come? Which technology is going to help you achieve that? Nature. Nature can absorb 37% of all of the carbon that we need to offset. But in order to harness the role of nature, we have to bring funding and policy action to allow nature to help us fight the climate change. So the money is there, but it has to be unleashed, and cannot be unleashed automatically. We have to do certain things on our part.
But this is an enormous challenge in the oceans, which has been left for too long.
Yes.
And it's getting worse by the hour, by the minute.
Yes. Well, we left it for too long for 2 reasons. If you don't know something, if something is foreign to you, then you can abuse it with impunity. So the idea is we didn't want to know anything about the oceans, because then we can dump all of our toxic waste in it, and we can cut and pollute and extract from it. Now the science is revealing to us how important is the ocean. For example, the ocean absorbs 25% of all of the carbon dioxide. Ocean is 4/5 of the planet. Two companies, let me just give you an example. Two companies, Eni and the company that owns British Airways, in order just to offset their carbon footprint on land, you need 12% of the land mass. That's for two companies. So how in God's name are we going to offset the rest of our carbon footprint on land? We need the ocean. The ocean is a carbon sink.
Ralph, quickly,
yes.
How do you ensure this cash, when it arrives, if it arrives, goes to the right places, given the enormity of the challenge?
Beautiful. So, like, when I invite you to visit my home, I have to make sure that my home is proper, looks nice, everything is fine in its place. Otherwise, you're going to go in and criticize me for the lousy food and how the place is unkept. There are certain things we have to do before the money comes in. Like, for example, when you're talking about unleashing all that money into the natural world, we have to bring that money under certain with an understanding. Two principles. The money has to come in to look after the natural asset, in this case the ocean, in perpetuity. Meaning, we discovered recently that whales in the ocean sequester tremendous amount of carbon, equivalent to thousands of trees. So the money that comes in, okay, how would it come in? Because the whales can produce carbon sequestration. We can sell the carbon service of these whales. The money comes in to look after the whales in perpetuity and look after and compensate the fishermen who are affected by, the presence of these whales and so forth. So that's the first principle. Look after the natural world in perpetuity. Second principle is to look after the communities in perpetuity through employment, through sustainable income. So that's how you bring the money in.
Ralph, thank you very much indeed. But of course you have three homes in Lebanon, Greece and Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Ralph Shami from the International Monetary Fund. We're broadcasting the Nature Newsroom from right in the heart of the Blue Zone, here in a workshop. And there was Greta Thunberg sitting through our glass. And about an hour ago, she walked out of that workshop past me, no mood to talk in any way, but saying stop greenwashing, despite all the progress here. From all of us, bye-bye.